Welcome everybody to another episode of Definitive Analysis, and this time we keep on going on the Sherwood Anderson train, and we do another short story that honestly I've been teaching for an extremely long period of time. One of the first, I think, short stories that really kind of I regularly would read with students every year, in addition to Hands, right? Which I do have a lecture for if you've not watched that one, which is another, probably the most popular story that Sherwood Anderson ever put together. I don't know why, but that was the one that is highly anthologized and canonized pretty much. But he's got a bunch of stories, and here's another very good one in my opinion, especially because it deals with different themes, maybe compared to some of his other work. Yet it plays upon some of the motifs, you could even say like kind of tropes that he uses here in this story as well. So I'll go right through it. I just kind of went through a copy, made some notes here, and we start with a happy father. And cherish that for a moment as we get started with the egg. And this is I believe the first story in his collection of short stories called The Triumph of the Egg, which are wonderful stories. I think just as good, if not better, than what we find in Winesburg, Ohio, at least in my opinion. So in this story, The Egg, we start off with a happy father who we could say is not the most ambitious, aspirational figure, at least at this point in his life. And remember, at this point in his life, it's before kids, it's before a wife even, right? So it's even before that. And he's just kind of a single guy, but he works as a farmhand and he enjoys himself in his downtime. There's a lot of social time spent with friends at the pub, singing songs, and we see language here, honestly, that you don't see in terms of authenticity later on, which is like happy in his position in life, right? No sense of trying to rise up in the world. So this is a life without ambition, but it changes very quickly, right? Because then the mother comes into the picture, that he gets married. And this is when the American passion, just using the evidence here, the American passion for getting up in the world took possession of them. And this is where we start to see that dangerous ownership, not of us, of our ambition and our dreams, but our dreams and ambition are in ownership of us as individuals, right? Like we've lost our will in all of this, right? We've lost our sense of control. So you'll see that a lot. That use of language, right? That kind of defies what we would traditionally think is acceptable. We are in control. Like that's the whole point, right? We as individuals are in control of our dreams, our ambition, and our destiny, right? This seems to take that away from us, the way that Sherwood Anderson, or we could say the narration, is phrasing this. Mom was a school teacher. And she gets her ideas from, we could say, kind of rags to riches stories. People, she talks about, like, what do we get here? Garfield and Lincoln, like these kind of governmental historic figures. But how they rose from very meager beginnings to pretty amazing feats in life. And so that's where she learned, and I think she's a school teacher, and one thing a lot of us all have in common, those of you out there watching this video, is we've gone through the American school system. And does it seem to preach this idea that you can start from nothing and you can attain, what you set your heart and mind to? Have we been given that idea for a long period of time? And then even beyond school, you talk about the media, what we consume there. Does it give us these ideas that, it's just about hard work and you can go from here to here? It's all about your dreams, right, and your ambition. At the end of that third paragraph, we get one of the first uses, though there will be many, uses of oxymoron. So this is incurably ambitious. And obviously, what the narrator is doing here, what Anderson is doing, is likening ambition to a disease, which is very counterintuitive, right? And when I teach this, that's why I'm doing this lecture now. I just got done going over this with students. You have to make that clear to students, right? We're treating this like a disease. Even though we've been told that ambition throughout most of our lives is, what's going to really make the difference, right? Something that we should be very mindful of. Here we're getting a different sense of things, a different outcome of this ambition. Moving on here, we get, so after the marriage, they also have a son, right? And it seems like this natural cycle, right? For so many people, not everybody, but for many people, you get married and then you have children, right? Either 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, who knows, right? Whatever you end up having. And there is this cycle that starts to begin here. And it's also the starting point. And it's the starting point here of new ambition. The wife, mother, we never get names, right? We don't really get names here. But she's unhappy with him just being a farmhand. And so she urges him, you could say directs, right? She directs him to open up a chicken farm. This will be a way to make more money. We can actually get ahead in life, etc., right? So now, let's not forget that happiness that the father had as just a farmhand. That's all going to have to get rearranged now, and we're going to see if things work out. We move into this very big paragraph that basically is a metaphor for, they're talking about eggs and then little chicks and then chickens and the few that make it through, right, to adulthood. What we're talking about, just to lay it out here, is on a more symbolic level, we're talking about dreams, right? Dreams that hatch, essentially, and spend a little time kind of finding their way. But what this paragraph will describe is, or you could also see this as people with dreams, right? Either way. But what the narrator goes on to describe here is quite it's quite sad, it's quite depressing. It's the short-lived life of the chick. How easily they start, they look cute. We could say the same of dreams. We feel wonderful about them, naive perhaps, right? Which is always this feeling sometimes of wonder, right? And that we can do it, right? This false sense of confidence. And then what he describes here, or what is described, I should say, is just a quick end to these chicks, right? They don't make it into adulthood. A few do, right? And the few that do, he then goes on to say, there's a literature, right? How do you get your hens, your chicks, to live and prosper? We could say the same with dreams, right? How do you get these things to prosper in your life? And there's a literature, right? Almost like a help book, how to raise strong chickens, right? So that you can, profit off of this, right? And what the narrator cynically goes on to say by the end of this, and the narrator is very much the child, but at an older age, right? A different time, reflecting back on this. I think quite somberly, to say the least. But looking back on this, right? And by the end of this paragraph, we have this hopeful literature. Hey, you can raise chickens to be successful, right? And the narrator tells us, don't believe it. And he gives us all of these other things that you really shouldn't believe either, like honesty in politicians, or you're going to find gold in the Alaskan hills. Like, all of these are fool's pursuits. And he's saying, believe that before you believe that dreams will work out, right? Or that your chickens can find their way to adulthood, right, and have this be successful. So very cynical, just to point that out in this big paragraph. We move on, and there is a little bit of shared sentimentality. I think most of this is like, oh, these depressing little birds, right? They try to get off their feet, and then they just get, struck by a wagon, or disease gets them, in the dozens, whatever. But he does say, and in their own way, lovely, right? So he does mention that they are lovely. I think I like to try to search out the little bit of sentimentality, the hopefulness, perhaps, right? Or just being non-critical, I guess you could say. Because we are and that's the whole point of this dad in this story, is we are so critical of what he's going through. He's critical of himself. And was it all needed in the first place? Well, maybe it is. Next up, they're likened to, as they move out of the chicken business, because it's not enough for the mother, it doesn't work out. They're likened to a tiny caravan of hope caravan takes us to a stage of war and occupation, invasion, refugees. That's going to be in the next paragraph we get the word. They're like refugees fleeing a battlefield. This starts up a bit of a motif for us, as ambition and getting ahead in life is now described as like a war that's taking place and people being like dislocated and, you know, like sent in all directions because of this war, right? They have nowhere to go. Ambition, that's like saying ambition can get you to a place where all of a sudden you feel like you have nowhere to go, which is maybe pretty, again, we talk about who's in control, right? Ambition or the individual. And to be that led astray by something to the point where you're stranded sounds like a pretty scary situation where you did not have too much control, right? Refugees, unfortunately, now in this current day and throughout time, have never really had too much control, and that's part of the sadness of it all, right? That's part of the tragedy of it all. Moving on, so they're on the move, and they're going into town to start up the next business venture. And what is the next business venture? It is going to be a restaurant business. But before we get there, there's a couple things before that really takes off. The father has become habitually silent and discouraged from being around the mother. And I always stop here with students and I say, why is that the case? And the answers we end up getting are he's being forced into this, right? He's having to become a different person based on this need to be in this business and the next, especially this restaurant business, right? That's a different type of person who's going to be going into that, it seems. But he's dealing with a lot of stress and pressure, it seems, right? And as we go into the restaurant business, it sounds like the mom might give up the teaching job. It's never explicitly stated, but that could be the case. They're all just all helping with the restaurant business. Now, one of the most beautiful parts of this story is when the child, the young boy here, is watching his father take a nap. And I'll tell you, in my life right now, between high school and the community college stuff, and then just being a parent of two boys, there's not a lot of time to take naps. That's, you know, I'll have to try to work that in a little bit more. But when you're taking a nap, why might that be the case? Well, you're exhausted. You just want to lay down and rest and just close your eyes for a little bit, right? It's important, right? If you're not getting enough sleep, it's not good for your health. We could say a few more things here. Well, there you go. The dad's taking a nap. No shame in the game, right? We've all been there. But what is the son thinking about? The son's thinking about something he learned at school. And what did he learn at school? What is he learning at school? Caesar, right? Julius Caesar. And I'll just read this. When he's looking at the bald path, his dad's sleeping on the couch or on the chair, and he's got this bald path coming down. The boy's imagining in that imagery the road leading out of Rome with Julius Caesar at the front, with the charge leading out to, and the word here used is the unknown, right? We get this idea of going off into the unknown. And I think that ties back to ambition, careers, business ventures. It is the unknown. You don't know how it's going to turn out. So there is that same element, right, of you don't know what to expect. But again, another thing this connects to is just ambition. When we think of Julius Caesar, especially in terms of how we learn about him in high school, like it's been a while, I haven't taken any history classes. I'm a minor in history, but I didn't even do that far back, like European, African, whatever history. I didn't study that stuff. But anyways, we do learn in high school history classes, Caesar represents ambition, right? And this idea of wanting more, right? And doing more, wanting more, and then, basically following through with that, right? And conquest and triumph, and some of these words that are, oh so important. That's the idea. Caesar represents ambition. But the irony of this wonderfully written scene, I think, is the dad just wants to take a nap. let's put the ambition to rest for just a second so that this guy can just take a nap and sleep. But the son's caught up in this conditioning, right, of ambition. And this is where I always ask students this a couple times as we read the story. How many of you, you think back, some of you are older now, but you think back to like kindergarten, grade school, how many of us had those teachers that told us, sky's the limit, you can do whatever you want to do, right? And some of this might be based on the way we look at Western history, right? Caesar, the Roman Empire. It's a symbol for greatness, perhaps. It's a symbol for controversy, of course, as well. But it still seems to be the canon from which we continue to grow, right? Or stick to. So anyways, just to point out the wonderful paradox involved there. Boy sees ambition in a father who just wants to take a nap. And that ambition comes from, I think, a conditioning of an educational system. If I had to like really, get specific on that. Couple paragraphs down, we have the grotesques. All right, this is a staple motif to Anderson's work. The grotesque is somebody who's trying to be something that they really aren't naturally built to be, right? Maybe I'm okay at teaching because I'm communicative, right? I can explain things. Maybe that's one reason I'm okay for the job. I also like to I have a good sense of humor, I think, right? And I get along with people. These are important for the job, but maybe there's a job out there where I don't have like the natural characteristics to be happy. And I think that's another thing. Not just that you're doing the job, but that you are kind of, content with the job. It makes you happy. It doesn't drive you wild, right? Or force you to be a person that you're not, which I think can happen, right? When you start to consider some careers out there. So the grotesques. The good way to understand the grotesque in the story, it's explicitly linked, is the deformed chickens. That for whatever reason, this is where it gets into the absurd, I think, a little bit in Anderson's work at times. He likes to keep them in bottles of alcohol and preserve these to show to people. In fact, he's going to keep them on the back shelf at the restaurant. Notice the ridiculousness of that. A restaurateur is not going to want to put disgusting things to unsettle people, right? And make it so they don't want to eat in their restaurant, right? So he's already off to a horrible start here. But more importantly is just what the grotesque is. And who is the grotesque? Just to get it out here as we, kind of halfway point, the grotesque is the father trying to be a restaurateur, right? A restaurant owner, even though he's not really built for that naturally, right? Goes against his character, especially because of his upbringing at the chicken farm, which has made him highly kind of stressed, and he has a dismal outlook, right, on anything, really, for that matter, but especially life and dreams, right, and this idea of getting your hopes up, I think. Okay, so he's got these things, and it's the other person that the deformed chicken is representative of is going to be the child as well. There's a moment when he's trying to kind of gel with the kids at school and do what they're doing where he's not really comfortable doing what he's doing, right? And kind of therefore is being forced or compelled to do it. So there's the idea of the grotesque. Now, just to give you one detail there, which is wonderful, the way this kind of link sets up, two-headed chicken. In what ways could we argue that the dad is two-headed at this point in the story? Well, he'd rather be happy just being a farmhand and something more basic in life, right? Maybe there's not a lot of pay there. Maybe there's not a lot of even security there. But that's what he wants to do, and it's what makes him happy, versus this other mind of the father, this other head, which is, I got to stay ambitious. I got to go through with this restaurant. My wife's telling me we need to do this. I need to maybe please my wife, make my wife proud, my son proud, who knows, right? But the central kind of root of all of that is ambition. Ambition's a pain in the butt. We all know this, like as you set up your college classes, you are, I'm going to take all 6 of these classes, right? You get ambitious, right? You start to puff up right there, and then before you know it, you have to deal with all that. And some people, when they get to that point of dealing, it might be too much, right? They might cave. They might have to kind of adjust things, right? Maybe they can't take on the full load. So ambition, right? It causes us to set ourselves up for a lot of difficulty, right? And then we have to really start to push through. So anyways, ambition, I guess, could also just be the drive to push through all that, right? Once it's all set up. But there will be the difficulty, right, that you set up for yourself. I think that goes without saying. Look at Julius Caesar. He didn't just walk out of Rome and then everyone just said, here you go. You know, some places did. They wanted to be incorporated into the Roman Empire. But he knew he was going to have to fight with some ferocious groups of people, right, in order to occupy their lands, right, and set up some kind of Roman system. So there was going to be difficulty, right? And the ambition is knowing that that's going to be coming. All right, moving on here. The restaurant that we have is in Pickleville. And how do you get a pickle? You put a cucumber in, I think it's vinegar, from what I remember, and you leave it for some time, and then it turns into a pickle. All right, that's the process. Remember we talked about how are we keeping the chickens, the deformed chickens, we're keeping them in alcohol preservation. How do we get, so when we look at pickles, it's the idea of preservation. And what's being preserved? A dream that doesn't fit the person who's trying to reach it, right? And there's right back to the grotesque. Notice that's why all this is very proximal in the writing itself, right? We established the idea of the grotesque. It's right there. It's a metaphor for the Father, also a metaphor for the Son, as we'll see in a little bit here. And it's all happening in Pickleville, where we are trying to preserve, right, this whole life. This idea of being a restaurant owner and ambitious, right, and playing this role in society, and definitely business. Like, let's not forget, a restaurant is, you're in the business world at this point, right? Okay, very good. Now, the mother, a lot of the hope, a lot of the optimism about the success of the restaurant does come from the mother, but the problem is that it's all just hope. She's saying it will be like this. They will come. They will enjoy themselves. They will buy the pie and they will buy the coffee, right? And like anyone, you don't know. Back to that whole idea of, I guess, Caesar and venturing off into the unknown. Business ventures can definitely feel that way, right? It is the unknown. Not all jobs feel that way because there's contracts, there's due process in a lot of instances. Some jobs have unions, let's not forget. But in the world of business, not so much, right? In the world of business, not so much. All right, so the dad starts to set up shop. Oh, one more thing. The mom wants to be in town because her son will now be out of a rural environment where the schools maybe aren't as well performing or equipped or whatever you want to say as the schools that are closer to Pickleville, right? You're closer to more of a hub of a town. And these are still very small towns, right? This ain't no Chicago or Atlanta or whatever, right? These are very small towns. Keep that in mind. But compared to the rural countryside where they're coming from, this is a much more modern environment. And that's one of the big themes of Sherwood Anderson's work, is to present the gap, right, that needs to be somehow traversed between that old rural understanding of life, sometimes very like biblically, right, intoned, right, because of just the traditions in place, and then the new modern systems, right, that are starting to erupt all around them. And it has a lot to do with the railroad, right? Once that railroad comes through your town, get ready for a lot of changes, not just in terms of products, but also and you know, things that you're going to see, but also in terms of ideas that will be delivered as well. It's a big theme in Anderson's work. All right, so she wants to be in town for better schools. The dad starts to set up the restaurant, and it just doesn't, you read through this and it's comical. I think it's supposed to be comical, tragic, who knows. But he puts up outside the restaurant, it says sharp command. Command takes us back to military. So in this pursuit of ambition, he's almost taking on some role as maybe like a general, right? Does that make sense for the restaurant business? Maybe not, but that's what he's feeling compelled to be here. And it says, he puts the sharp command, eat here. And I always love to ask my students, what would be a much better way to get people to come in your restaurant? And people, my students say, world's best slice of pizza, or, fresh juice, buy one, get one, or something like that. There's many ways we can entice people into our restaurant, well beyond eat here, right? It just sounds lifeless in a way. And much more military oriented, right? And that's the whole point. It's transforming the father here a little bit from a farmhand. And remember too, you talk about soldiers and farmhands. That's a major contrast. Farmers are usually, unless they really need to get involved, like you go back, thousands and thousands of years, farmers have always been more peaceful, right? Just living with the land, tending for themselves, or working within a community. That's different than a soldier or a mercenary, right? Somebody who was paid to provide that type of a service. So this is a scary transformation, which I've never really thought about with this story too much, but I think it's true. It's a scary transformation for the father. Moving on. He's hoping that a troop of little girls will, this is now talking about the son's experiences. And this is where we see he is the grotesque. There's a troop of little girls hopping and singing. There's troop, right? It's likened to a military, almost like troops moving along here. And he tries to get involved with that. He tries to show that gaiety, that happiness, that joyfulness that the kids in town seem to possess. And it doesn't work for him because of his upbringing in the chicken farm, right? And all the symbolism there, right? What that means thematically. He's afraid to be seen in his gay mood. Old use of the word, he means happy here. Afraid to be seen as happy, which is very counterintuitive. We would look at Facebook. Facebook is all about seeing us happy, right? It's like a highlight reel. And imagine some of the other social platforms are as well. So a very ironic I think, narrator, right? This is the son, again, looking back on his life. All right, very good. The mom wants to get more money going, so she takes on boarders. It's easy to overlook this, believe it or not. I think for many years I didn't notice this. That means they're taking on people staying in their house. They're paying to stay there. It's almost like Airbnb your house while you're still there. And I always want to point out here, you start letting people into your house, what's going to change inside the home at that point, right? As your money is going to go up because you're getting money from those boarders, but what's going to start to go down, and some of the quickest things that'll pop into the minds of students is going to be privacy, right? You even think about that with like Uber and Lyft drivers. That's their vehicle. Some of them might have another vehicle. That's wonderful if they can afford it. But that's their vehicle, which is supposed to be on some level private. But now you're sharing this pretty routinely in a public way. But now it's still your private, right? So that's even leading to a little bit of a disruptance between privacy, right, and at a sacrifice for making money. They're doing that by having people stay in their house, right? And this could also take away from family bonding, right? Just having the mom and the dad there and the son and being able to connect. Despite being busy throughout the day here, right, taking care of things, that's going to be a little bit harder when you have boarders in your house. By the end of that paragraph, the language is, the American spirit took hold of him. He also became ambitious. So he, as if the father already changing his life and following this new path wasn't already somewhat, let's say, ambitious, here it becomes official. And it's going to be coupled with the idea of being an entertainer. And I'll ask, I know, a lot, who knows who will be watching this, but different ages, right? But I would imagine all of us at some point in our lives maybe had some idea that we could be an entertainer, right? Maybe not everybody, but it is a very, let's say, common dream. One that is on full display, right? We see entertainers everywhere. They're living their best lives. Of course, they're highly scrutinized in celebrity magazines, but also look at all the amazing benefits to their lives as well, especially compared to some Americans, right? Major contrast. So to be the entertainer, to be the life of the party, to be the star of the show, to be the big talent, to be the one that everybody notices, right? And even if we don't want to be entertainers, maybe even within our own fields, or as students, we still feel this way, right? We want to be successful, right? In some engaging way, in some charismatic way. All right, so that's his idea. And I think if you know enough about the father up to this point, especially the chicken farm, right? And we get the kid thinking about the chicken farm, but don't forget it was the dad working it with all that death occurring all the time, right? So he's lived through it too. How happy can you be? Well, let's keep on going. He wants to be the jolly innkeeper. And again, the word troop used again, as the dad now is stuck in this idealism. The mom had it before. They'll come to our restaurant. They'll buy our coffee. They'll buy our cake. It will be great. It doesn't work that way. Just as he's putting up that eat here sign, it says it's very seldom obeyed. Don't overlook that important detail. Nobody is going into this restaurant, right? And we all know, like in real life, like the restaurant industry is a tough one, right? There's so much overhead involved. And so if things don't really get going, it's easy, I think, for the business to kind of meet its end. So it's not working out. So he starts to be filled with this optimism once again. Or not once again, really, you could argue for the first time, but now it's through entertaining people. Come on in, take a seat. I think a lot of restaurants are like this to a certain degree. We don't get over the top entertained at a lot of pretty normal restaurants that we go to, but they're also very pleasant. They're there to help us out, answer questions that we might have. They have personalities. I'm sure they're instructed to have a little bit of charisma and be personable, right? Or else they wouldn't be in the business, right? I think a lot of waiters and waitresses, wait staff that we come across are, they know what they're doing, right? They're generally very nice people, right? Very engaging people. So is this going to work for the father? But he's thinking everyone's going to troop in. Now it's always, it's about young people, right? It's about young people. That's what takes the priority for the father. And he's said to be an uncommunicative man. So we're like, how is this going to work out? A lot of contradiction, what he's doing versus the natural person that he is here, right? Important to note that. That's the grotesque, right? We have the grotesque right here. We're kind of following his story here. This idea of being entertaining and therefore successful invades their house, right? And invades is some of the strongest diction we're going to see that brings us to that motif, that idea of war, right? And dislocation. And I think we've seen the father on one side of this war, waging a war, right? But also, ironically, he'll be the refugee as well, right? All of a sudden, you turn into the refugee of your own kind of chaos that you create. Moving on. He did not waste much of his ammunition on the railroad men that he served at night. Again, ammunition, right? The means to get to the top, the means to reach my goal. Ammunition, right? Almost like we're striking, shooting off a machine gun. And it relates to that idea of war. He doesn't care about the guys who are just working on the railroad. And I think it's because they're older, their ambition has essentially settled. You could say that of a lot of people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. They're happy with what they're doing. Maybe it's not their dream come true, but it's enough. And they even eat fried eggs. And if eggs are dreams, fried might be like a dream that's been exhausted, right? Or at least it's kind of peaked and settled, or there's been a compromise of some kind. That could be a way of understanding the fried egg, right, in that particular state. But anyways, he doesn't care about these guys. He wants young people, because there is a potential unknown, right, keyword. And also with just young people, they tend to be very exuberant. They tend to be very positive. They tend to be trend setting. Right, so we always talk about here, if they like your restaurant, man, they're going to spread the word quickly. Of course, this is back in like the early 1900s, everybody, so they didn't have Yelp and social media and all these other things to spread the word, but it's all the same. Young people, reminds me of like watching Happy Days. I used to watch that as a kid. And they would go to the diner, right? They were always at the diner. That's where all the kids were and all the activity. It's where you'd go to hang out and meet people, right? So it's all the same. It's all the same. And that's who he wants. Young people, maybe just based on that idea of potential and what their lives could be. He has a bad experience that's alluded to. Toward the end of the story, we find out exactly what it is in the last page, right? Last page or so. We get the word prenatal. In addition to things tying us back to war, you have some clear diction tying us back to conception. Before life, the conception of life, right? And then, of course, the egg that follows the child, right? Metaphorically, the child that must now be raised, right? Not only physically, right, giving them food and shelter, but also in terms of ideas, right? Ideologically, that child now has to be raised too. Because a lot of this is dealing with psychology. That's what Sherwood Anderson does in his fiction. Is he's maybe one of the first authors, American authors, and that's what makes him unique, to really deal with the, unique and dark, kind of not so easy to understand psychology of people living their lives in America. Sometimes through these kind of absurd stories, or stories that have some absurd parts to them. I think that's a good way of putting it. So anyways, the beginnings of a dream, the beginnings of a life, the cycle of all this, man, right? Just like chickens and eggs, people and kids, the cycles never end. He comes upstairs, we'll find out what happens, but the mom does the bald path on the head, which sometimes bald even means stress, right? Like, just kind of, it's not true. I don't think that's like scientifically proven. Stress makes you bald or go bald. But you know, at least within like theme and stuff, we could argue that. But she's stroking it, which could be the mom like trying to soothe his ambition. Maybe you can do this again. You just got to pick yourself back up, right? Because it's not going to end. It's not like they're going to walk away from this business. Or will they? I guess it's the story does kind of just end. We don't know what to expect. All right, so moving on here. Joe Kane, right, one of the last big parts of the story, Joe Kane. Now, Joe Kane is everybody that the father wants to be. He's the son of a successful businessman from Pickleville, right? He's living, this dad, this businessman from Pickleville, is living the life that the dad really kind of emulates, right? Successful business owner. And this kid's young. This would be a great person to impress. That's kind of the mindset, right, of the father here. And so, but his way of doing it is, he brings up the illusion of Christopher Columbus. And I'll be quick with this, because you can look up the information if you need to. I didn't know about this before reading the story. There's a real story to this. Columbus said he could make an egg, hence the title of the story, right, perhaps, stand on its end, right, even though it's kind of this weird, kind of oval, whatever, and we know that it'll just tip over, forget about it. And the way that Columbus does this, right, and this is almost like a TikTok thing back in the day, gets people's attention. Oh, Columbus says you can make an egg, stand on its end. Oh, tune in, right? Or stay in, we'll keep you informed, whatever. So it's kind of like a thing. But anyways, what he does though is I think he takes a spoon and he like taps the bottom of the egg so that it kind of goes concave a little bit on the bottom, and then it's got more of a resting place. And it stands up. And he says he did it. But there's like people who are like, oh, he's a genius. And then there's other people who are like, he's a cheat. And the dad is stuck on this. He's a cheat. Now, when we think Columbus, we had Caesar, highly ambitious, especially in terms of how we learn about these figures. Here's another one, especially in the time period of the 1900s, nobody was getting politically correct on Christopher Columbus, right? It was a good holiday. He was a great person through and through. I live in the greater Los Angeles area, right, Ventura County, and we don't celebrate Christopher Columbus Day anymore. We see him more as a butcher, great navigator. I want to hand that to him, but he was a butcher, right? He would give payment for the killing of indigenous peoples just to wipe them out, right, so that they could take over those islands, right, and other places once they got to them. That's not, we don't deal with any of that, because that's not even what Anderson's dealing with. He's not dealing with that. But he doesn't like the fact that Columbus is also a figure of ambition, especially when you go back 50 to 100 years ago in this country. So we have two very ambitious figures, Caesar and Columbus, right, that we look to for ideas of ambition, to sail the great seas not knowing the real route and have to discover this, right? That's quite amazing. Even in the sense that he didn't reach where he intended, it was still quite amazing, right, to do that in his time. Too bad he was a butcher, right? Or it could have been a wonderful situation or a better situation. Anyways, the dad doesn't like that he's a cheat, right? And so he says that he can do it without cheating. He can make an egg stand on its bottom, right, on its end. And the way he does this, and he does pull it off, which is quite miraculous, is he rolls it between his palms. And what he says is the electricity generated from his body, his hands, is affecting the interior of the egg or whatever, and it's going to make it so it can balance. And he pulls it off, right? The problem is that Joe Kane wasn't looking. This young son of a businessman, he was not looking. And they're the only ones in this diner, right? No one else is there. The family's upstairs, right? Keep that in mind. So that makes him angry, right? The fact that he didn't see it. So now he feels like he has to pull down the deformed chickens, and he thinks he can impress Joe Kane with these. And this is that absurdity, I think. No, this is obviously the worst thing you would want to do. You're not going to make somebody want to stay or eat or have a beverage at your restaurant if this is what you're shoving in their face. But the beauty of it from, I think, a craft standpoint, Sherwood Anderson, the way he tells a story, is that he's essentially showing him an example of himself, right? The two-headed chicken stuck in this alcohol. Here he is working in Pickleville, right? Preserving this dream that's just not working out. It does not fit his dispositions. It's not successful. This could lead to him being worse off than better off because of this ambition that he had. And that's a question for all of us in life, right? Will this ambition get me into trouble, I guess? Will I be able to stand this? Will I be able to adapt to this? Moving on. In an outburst of generosity, nice oxymoronic language. When we think of an outburst of something, it's usually of anger. But here, it's the opposite for the father. In this need to be impressive and like the jolly innkeeper, it's an outburst of generosity, which could mean like it's not normal. I think for a lot of us, an outburst of anger means it doesn't occur often. It's wonderful, right? And I think that's true for many of us, right? Yeah, you might get angry once in a while, and right, but if it's like all the time, guess what? You might have a problem. Right? You might have a problem if it's all the time. This is an outburst of generosity, which means the father, in this military state, trying to be successful and ambitious, has lost that sense of generosity, and now it's this rare thing, right, that tries to come out, and it needs to come out because this would be the time for it, right, trying to entertain a guest. I love it how Joe actually buys a coffee and a cigar. Thank you, Joe, for buying something that could have been one of their only things they served all day. Notice the only people that come in the restaurant are the unambitious railroad workers, right, who come in for their standard food, right, just live those lives day after day. They're always there. Moving on, he's got one final trick, and this is all a major extended metaphor, all right? And the dad, yeah, I love that. Just to mention it one more time, the deformed chickens and alcohol, and the father here floating in Pickleville at this restaurant, just like that chicken, trying to make a dream that's not really fit for him work, right? He is the chicken. It's a wonderful thing. Okay, this last trick, you almost got to get the visual in your mind, if you don't mind. I'm sure I'll have some images on the screen here to help you out a little bit. He's going to take an egg, which is hard, right? If you push on it, you will easily break it, right? You'll crack it. And he's going to take it and he's going to heat it up in vinegar on a pan. He's going to let it heat up, and then what he's going to do is he's going to be able to slide it in a glass bottle, the small opening of a glass bottle. He's going to be able to push it through. The egg is going to get in there and it will retake its natural hardened shape. And that's the trick, right? People will be like, how did you get that egg in that bottle? The dad tries it, And it even says here, he worked in a spirit of desperate determination. Again, oxymoronic language. If you're determined, should it really feel desperate, right? And if you're desperate, should you really feel determined? It almost sounds like that's an impossible situation, or one that's at least going to be difficult to deal with. Let's just put it that way. So beautiful oxymoronic language. Another piece of diction, before the trick was about to be consummated. And you got to get a little mature for this, but the consummation of the trick. Consummation means sex, right? To consummate a marriage means to have sex after the marriage. So it speaks to this whole idea of cycles, right? You find a partner, you get married or not, right, in this day and age, but you link up, right? And then you have sex and you have a child, right? And boom, the cycle has already started. Now you got a kid to raise. They're going to start having to worry about dreams and ambition alongside you worrying about dreams and ambition. And this really is big parts of our lives, right? This ends up being major parts of our lives. It's a little interesting to think consummation, the act of sex, and then you have a bottle and we're squeezing an egg through an opening, which almost feels like sperm perhaps, or something along those lines, right? The act of conception, right? So a lot going on here in terms of some of those themes, I guess you could say, those motifs connected to those themes. He worried the egg. Really strange semantics. It should be the egg worried him. I'm in control. I'm the subject here, right? But instead, we've become the objects. We are worrying the egg, right? The egg is in control, whatever that could be. For me, dreams and ambition, or a person with dreams and ambition, right? But you can have different ideas. You can rephrase it, do what you got to do. Joe Kane, he gets so mad because the trick doesn't work. It bursts, right? It goes all over him. It broke under his hand, right? Spurted over his clothes. And Joe Kane stopped at the door and he laughs. And that's just, it's very cliche, but I wrote down insult to injury, right? Insult to injury. That's just going to make this worse for the father. He gets angry. He throws the egg at Joe Kane. He barely misses his head. Joe Kane dodges it and he gets out the door, right? A lot of symbolism here. When the father throws the egg, right? You got to think about what that egg represents. Dreams, ambition, what it means for the father, how that's impacted him. This is sentences worth of interpretation, right? But once you have that, that's the idea. He's throwing all of that at Joe Kane. And we ask ourselves, why Joe Kane? Why this young guy? Why this young son of a businessman? Why is he going to be the one who gets the egg thrown at him? When he goes upstairs, the father, because remember, this was alluded to earlier in the story, he's going to look like, the boy's going to think the dad looks like he's ready to throw the egg at them. And you can do some analysis there. I think it's even more interesting, right? When you start to think, why at the son and why at the mom? Well, the mom, obviously, he's devastated, he's frustrated. She's the one who puts him into these situations. It's her drive, it's her interpretation of ambition that is now driving the family's reality, and it's devastating for him. Maybe he wants to throw the whole mess at her, right? And whole mess is obviously pretty vague, I understand that, but you get the point here, right? So he comes upstairs. He looks distressed. He looks like he's ready to destroy all eggs, which is obviously the use of hyperbole. You can't destroy all eggs, but maybe it's the idea of all dreams. Destroy the idea that we must preach of dreams, right? That we must be led astray to follow our dreams. There's probably a lot we could say here. This is the beautiful part of the story, and I know when I did some artwork on this, I did it on a tablet a long time ago, and I drew this scene. And it wasn't a great picture, but it was the family upstairs, because he closes the restaurant. Joe Kane leaves, the dad closes the restaurant, and he goes upstairs and reunites with his family. And they all have this somber, maybe depressing kind of moment, but make sure you understand this. The good news, they're together, right? It's a family that's together. And ambition, by closing that restaurant, ambition has been laid to rest, at least for the night. The story just ends. We don't know how it's going to pick up the next day, right? We have no idea. That's the beauty of short stories, right? They don't have to tell us. But they close the restaurant, put ambition to rest, and then we reconnect with family. I didn't mention this, but remember, when they start getting the restaurant going, the mom wants to be more ambitious, so they keep it open 24/7. Great, maybe you'll get more customers, you'll make more money, but now the mom's not around the dad throughout the day because she's working, dad sleeps and during the day does the night shift, kids at school, there's no family time, right? There's no family bonding taking place any longer. It comes back here at the end. And I think that's the major silver lining of this story. And a major theme that we could write about, that we can think about, is family. And how we learn from our parents and guardians, that's for sure, right? We learn so much through their responses and their reactions throughout life, I'm sure. And it has all kinds of profound effects on us. All right, very good. A beautiful story, I think, for Anderson. And see, the last language and final triumph of the egg, that's the book title. The short story collection of short stories is Triumph of the Egg. So I believe this was the first story. So I think he starts off with a bang with this family that we have here. They come out of a town called Bidwell originally, like when he was a farmhand. And Bidwell, you know, I think about what that means. To bid somebody well just means to like wish them optimism, right? I hope everything goes well. I bid you well. And maybe that is another thing that we grow up with early in our lives, is just a lot of people saying, yeah, I hope it works out for you, right? Instead of maybe the opposite, which is, do you think that'll work out for you, right? And being a little bit more critical of these ideas and finding what's truly going to make us happy, right? Instead of just this, hey, I bid you well, right? Hope everything goes well there. That could be a good thing. Maybe bid well also could be just, I bid you well, just wellness is all that matters. Forget about success. Forget about ambition, the need to feel ambitious in life. Just be well. Just be content. Be happy. And remember, we don't see that word happy too often in this story, but you do see it in the first paragraph when he's still just a farmhand, with working with Mother Earth every day, hanging out with his buddies on Saturday night, getting drunk at the saloon, singing songs. He lost that happiness, as soon as the wife comes into the picture, kid comes into the picture, different ideologies come into the picture, and it's very much a tragic story, perhaps, but at least they're still together at the end. I hope this lecture was helpful, and who knows, maybe there's some more Sherwood Anderson fiction to come. I hope everybody has a great day, and I'll see you next time.